But what even is a tabletop exercise? What counts as a tabletop exercise? We know all about board games. Well, let's talk about all the different types of tabletop exercises that you can have. Let's start from really big basics here and define what a game is, or thinking about what a tabletop game is for our sakes. I like to think game is a very simple word, but actually very hard to put a definition around. To me, there are three components that make something a game. It has an objective or an aim, it has some rules, and it has players who have agency to make decisions. Some words often creep into definitions of a game that I don't really like, such as it has to be fun or it has to be a competition. I think that sometimes games aren't fun, or they're not designed to be fun, and sometimes they're designed to be cooperative and not competitive. The definition that I like is broad enough to include things that might not be considered classical games, but I think they actually are games. Things like social media or the stock market. But it's narrow enough of a definition to exclude things like photography, although it could become a game if you added some rules and an objective, alongside some decisions about photography. Never mind. The games that interest us have specific organizational nature to them, like operations or strategy or culture, types of games that are designed for this purpose. When people classically think about different types of tabletop exercises, they think about lots of important people sitting around a big rectangular table. The truth is, tabletop exercising includes many different types of games, depending on what the objective is. I'm going to create some analogies of broad different types of objectives that we can think about. Type number one is a periscope. The things that are in submarines. These are games that offer a broad view to survey the landscape and identify potential areas of interest. It's about looking widely and generating a range of ideas. These are hypothesis generating games. So then we have a microscope. This is for hypothesis testing, on the other hand. It's like using a microscope to zoom in on a specific hypothesis with precision and detail, examining the evidence to confirm it or refute it. We then have a telescope. These are exploratory. Even before hypothesis has been generated, look far into the unknown to identify new phenomena or theories that could later be tested through hypothesis. The next scope is a stethoscope. These types of games are for diagnostic purposes, where there's a focus on understanding the current state or the condition, which may lead to a formulation of hypothesis based on the observed symptoms. Kaleidoscopes, the ones that change a bunch of colors and make crazy patterns, they're free thinking. Diversity of ideas, multiple patterns and possibilities can be observed and considered. Then we have my last two, which are not my favorite games, but deserve to be on this list. Horoscopes. These are more speculative, for fun or for confirmation bias, when you want to have something that proves what you've already been thinking. And the colonoscope. It's not pleasurable or sexy, but you have to do it when required for regular screening, or if you have a problem in a specific area that needs a biopsy. So we have the types of tools that we can use. We've got periscopes for looking broadly, surveying the horizon. We've got microscopes for looking really close. We've got telescopes for looking really far away. Stethoscopes for diagnosing. Kaleidoscopes for free thinking. Colonoscopes for regular screening. And horoscopes for more speculative fun. Games are incredibly difficult to categorize, and I've tried to do my best here. All of those tools also fit across a few different axes. So here we have our axes. There are games that go across two different scales. Crunchy to smooth, or the x-axis here, represents the rule interpretability. How crunchy are the rules? They have to be really gritty and lots of complicated rules to be on the crunchy side, and they have to be quite smooth and free-flowing to be on the smooth side. On the y-axis, we have detailed to abstracted. This is the level of fidelity of the game. Think about this as like how close the game is to the actual territory, or is it a map? Is it an abstracted version of that thing? Now you might think these two axes are quite similar, but the reason why I chose these two is to better categorize the vibe of a game. Different types of tabletop exercises or different types of games are more genres than anything. So I'm comparing the different types to other vibes along these axes to give you the vibe check alongside two other mediums that have strong vibes: music and art. I'm hoping that these analogies will paint a bit more of a mental model for you when it comes to defining some game types. So in the crunchy, detailed quadrant, the vibe is similar to a classical orchestra or photorealism in art. Every ingredient or step in this process is chosen for a specific reason. Complex compositions, precise, intricate arrangements. Everything is meticulously crafted, and playing a game in this realm demands understanding, order, and strategy. In the crunchy, abstracted, we have things like jazz improvisation or expressionism. These are complex structures that allow for individual expression, but within a broader framework. It reflects crunchy and complex rules, but they serve as a foundation for abstract, emergent gameplay and narratives. The vibe of this, think anything that people debate, well, is it an art or a science? It's right in that zone. In the smooth but detailed quadrant, we have folk music or impressionist art. Games in this space have the ability to capture the essence of a subject without detailed realism. Smooth gameplay here prioritizes accessibility and fluidity over intricate rules and game systems. But it also conveys a rich tapestry of details and emotions. This quadrant suits games that are easy to engage with whilst providing a very deep, rich experience. In the smooth but abstracted quadrant, we have lo-fi music or minimalism in art. Games here are immersive yet quite abstract. They rely on motifs and simple harmonies. It offers an experience that is easy to understand and appreciate without any prior knowledge, abstracting the bare essentials, and evokes a vibe or a mood or emotion through simplicity rather than through detailed narratives or complex structures. Games in this quadrant focus on straightforward gameplay mechanics and broad universal themes that resonate on a more intuitive level. Going back to our objective styles and the scopes, we have periscopes, which are good at horizon scanning, microscopes for testing hypothesis and zooming in, telescopes for seeing far off and identifying new phenomena, stethoscopes for diagnosing, kaleidoscopes for free thinking, colonoscopes for regular screening or if you have a problem, and horoscopes for more speculative, fun, or confirmation bias. I know this is a long walk, but stick with me. Now we understand our spectrum or our palette of different vibes of games, and we have the different types of objectives that we can hit with games. I think this is a really good starting point to give you those definitions or types of games now, and we're going to plot them on this map somewhere. Let's start with a classic war game. This is where you have maps, counters, and kinetic implications based on physics and time. They're heavy mechanic focused on the outcome, and it really is focused on controlling time and space. The rules are usually pre-written and attempt to be modeled from statistics or quantitative data with a referee that interprets them. They are for strategic, operational, and tactical levels, diving deep into the detailed actions of individual units, emphasizing immediate objectives and tactics. Things like logistics, command structures, and coordination between different units to achieve a strategic goal. These games can simulate grand strategies, political decisions, resource management, and overall conflict. Used for combat, supply chain, pandemics, or climate change, anything that's really crunchy and requires a lot of quantitative data. These are very crunchy and detailed, so I think they're more of a periscope or a microscope, depending on what the objective is. Matrix games are very similar to war games, but the actions that you take are resolved through structured, turn-based, logical discussion, almost similar to a debate. You describe the way something should happen, and an umpire decides the likelihood, sometimes using some dice to help as well. The advantage of a Matrix game over a war game is it can consider intangible things like culture and beliefs and perceptions, emphasizing player interaction and narrative over complex rules and calculations. More simple, more smooth than crunchy, but they can be slow and tedious still, and heavily rely on the player's ability to form arguments. So it can be a little exclusive to some players or stakeholders. They're good for complex issues with multiple stakeholders with lots of diverse interests. So again, in the middle on the crunchiness, very detailed, and the scopiness is the same, a periscope or a microscope, depending on the objective. Role-playing games are a great multi-purpose tool. Players assume a specific role that persists throughout the game. They can be a person or an entity or an organization with specific assets and abilities and a persona. Actions that you take within a game are usually resolved with a central umpire, like a game master, and they're good at high-level empathy, where people can gain perspectives on certain agency. They can be crunchy or smooth, usually somewhere in the middle, and a game can be detailed or abstracted. And scopiness does also depend on the objective, but they can offer a broader range of view sets. So I've included Kaleidoscope. A committee game is like a management meeting deciding the courses of action in the game with a voting or a discussion or a committee deciding. These are really good for command friction or diplomacy. These are usually pretty smooth rules, usually fairly abstracted. These are more diagnostic or routine for practicing board meetings. So these get a stethoscope or a colonoscope. Mega games are where many participants with multiple different roles and hierarchies all play a game at the same time. Usually this looks like a bunch of people sitting at a bunch of different tables, all playing maybe other types of mini games. The actual mechanics might be similar to a war game or a role play component or a committee component, all running inside of the game environment, progressing the overall narrative forward. There are multiple different umpires called the control that direct the flow of the game. There's a big organizational component to these. They can be multi-center or multi-table. They're usually quite crunchy, but abstracted, but they're good at representing a wide variety of different things. So I'm giving this a kaleidoscope. Narrative games emphasize narrative. Story can be influenced by actions and decisions that progresses it forward. This is obviously abstracted and not very crunchy, and it's good for horizon scanning. A seminar game combines elements of lectures and discussions, focusing on education about specific topics and scenarios with some game-like elements. They're often used in academic or professional development contexts. They're not very crunchy, they're usually very detailed, and for focusing on a particular issue. Functional exercises are another name for big drills or big simulations where hands-on interactive exercises are required that test and evaluate capabilities of an organization or operations. These actually involve people doing things because a skill is usually being tested. So they require some resources, lots of personnel, albeit within a simulated context. There's not many rules to these. It's usually just following a narrative, but quite detailed because it needs to have high fidelity for the practice of the thing. So these are more of a microscope. Could be a colonoscope though. Red teaming is where participants with an existing plan or a strategy or something need to have it tested, and they need someone to assume the role of an adversary, an adversarial role. They're what's known as the red team. These games are all about simulating the adversary, identifying weaknesses and vulnerabilities to the plan or the asset or the strategy. After the game's finished, usually analyze the identified weaknesses and vulnerabilities and explore ways to improve them. These are usually pretty crunchy and detailed and focused on a specific issue, so they're a microscope. Next, we have the whole category of structural analytical games. Now, this is going to take a while because there's many of them. Most of them fall into the smooth side of rule sets and abstracted, but the scopiness varies. So I've grouped all of these by what type of scope they are, but they're usually about hypothesis testing, hypothesis searching, or looking far off into the future. So I've grouped these by if they're a microscope, a periscope, or a telescope. The microscopes include key assumptions checking, which is where you get a problem and you want to test the underlying assumptions that you have about that, identifying any potential flaws in gaps and logic. You have competing hypothesis games. This is where you identify a problem or a situation and then try to develop multiple hypotheses about it. You need to analyze the strengths and weaknesses in each hypothesis, considering evidence that either supports or refutes it. Devil's advocate games are other microscopes. This is when you have a prevailing consensus or a viewpoint that is accepted amongst your participants, and you try to play the devil's advocate, arguing against that consensus, trying to change the validity. Next, you have A-B teaming, which is where you have two equal hypotheses or objective, and you're developing strategies or solutions assigned to that particular one. So you're testing one against the other. We have two types of periscopes here. So this is horizon scanning. The first is low change, high impact thinking. So this is when you want to look at low probability events that have significant consequences. Think pandemic or something. You're identifying potential low chance but high impact events, and then you're discussing things about them. The second type of periscope in structural analytical games is backwards what if thinking. So that's where you have a specific outcome or an end state, and you work backwards from there, identifying chain of events or decisions that could have led to that specific result. So this highlights potential vulnerabilities or opportunities for improvement, or tries to work out causative chains. Last, we have the telescopes, looking for far off into the future. Brainstorming is one of these. You're trying to come up with creative solutions or innovative approaches and discussing them. Outside-in thinking is when you have a situation or a problem that requires more understanding and you need to consider external factors such as other stakeholders or market conditions or global trends that may influence the situation. This is when you're looking from the outside in on a problem. Alternative futures is the third telescope. This is where you have a context or a problem that could have long various potential future outcomes. So you're trying to create these different future scenarios, considering trends, opportunities, and challenges that might arise, and then discussing them. Lastly, some extras that I might throw in. We have a scripted or a spectacle game. These are usually high stakes, high production value, and high motivation. So spectacle games, which are big flashy ones, just beware they could be horoscopes in disguise. One curveball I'll throw in at the end here is metagames. Metagaming is usually a term used from people thinking about strategy outside of the actual rules that are allowed. But I think a metagame is a legitimate type of game where you want the outside perspective or people to transcend the rules or knowledge boundaries. I've added a new type of scope here. So this one I call the gyroscope. It's for having different layers of forces and balances, and you want to manipulate those somehow. Theatre and improv games are also worth mentioning. These can be kaleidoscopes or horoscopes for improving confidence, communication, creativity, and improvisation. There you have it, a bit of a framework to think about the flavors of different types of games and what type of objective they are for. So now I've gone over the different types of definitions of tabletop exercises. Next, we're going to discuss how do we go about actually choosing which one is right for us. You can also check out some of our other free tools in the description below, including our tabletop exercise starter kit, our scenario generator,